Hashirama Senju, the first Hokage, hailed as the God of Shinobi, was without a doubt the strongest ninja ever in the Naruto universe up until the War Arc when Obito absorbs the Ten Tails, becoming Jubito and therefore becoming stronger than Hashirama. But before that, Hashirama had barely any competition. The only person who you could argue was as powerful as he was Madara, and Hashirama still defeated him in the Valley of the End, even though it was a very difficult fight. And it's undeniable that Hashirama has had a lot of impact in the story, not only because of what he's done, but also just because of his cells. Many people want his DNA to inject it onto their bodies to enhance their capabilities and do all types of things. And the guy was also the founder of the Leaf Village. Pretty important stuff. But what if I told you that Hashirama wasn't always the God of Shinobi? No. In the beginning of the Naruto series, I mean, obviously Hashirama was a very respected shinobi, but he was not hailed as the God of Shinobi. This wasn't his power level in the beginning of the show. Kishimoto came up with that much later in the story, and as a matter of fact, Minato was supposed to be the strongest Hokage back in the day. Every time anybody said anything about Minato, they were revering him essentially as the strongest ninja ever. The most powerful, most talented ninja that has ever lived in the Leaf Village. And this was later changed, a retcon done by Kishimoto. Obviously Minato was still extremely powerful, don't get me wrong. It's just that Hashirama ascended into a godlike level. So let's take a closer look at this retcon and try to determine around when Kishimoto decided to make Hashirama the God of Shinobi and whether or not this was a good decision for the story. The first time we ever see Hashirama in action is in the fight between Hiruzen and Orochimaru, when Orochimaru brings the first and second Hokage in the Edo Tensei form. Now later on in the Naruto War Arc, it's stated that the Edo Tensei that Orochimaru used was not complete, so of course Hashirama and Tobirama were not at the peak of their powers, because, well, what we see them doing in that fight against Hiruzen is not terribly impressive if you consider what they do later in the series, especially Hashirama. But this was part of the retcon, because if you read the Orochimaru versus Hiruzen fight, or if you watch it in the anime, whatever, you clearly see that Hiruzen's demeanor's like, okay, I kinda understand what's happening here, as Orochimaru was bringing the coffins up. He brought the first, the second, and then when the third coffin was rising and Hiruzen was like, okay, I think this one is Minato's, then he's, I cannot let this happen, because if Minato returns, I am completely screwed. Then he proceeds to try and stop the third coffin from rising, and then it actually fails, but not because of Hiruzen, it's because Minato's soul was sealed in the Reaper Death Seal anyways. But Hiruzen seemed much more worried about Minato than Tobirama and Hashirama. But just think about this for a second. If Hashirama had been established as a character that had the power levels as he would achieve in Naruto Shippuden, then Hiruzen should be much more afraid of Hashirama than Minato, even though he had no chance against Minato either. But Hashirama could create a Buddha statue with 1,000 arms that was the size of the Leaf Village. Obviously, Hashirama was not the God of Shinobi in that point of the story, because if he was, then Hiruzen would have just quit the fight. He wouldn't even have tried, because he would have absolutely no chance whatsoever against Hashirama. But then when the fight starts, Hiruzen actually does pretty well against the first and second Hokage. He manages to land a couple of blows. Now, of course, he struggles a little bit because it's 3 against 1 essentially, but nothing too crazy. Hiruzen's doing pretty damn well, and we get the first glimpse of wood-style Hashirama's signature ability, and it's already hyped up in the first appearance of the character. Everybody says, oh, that's his ability. He can create life out of nowhere using wood style. It's pretty damn crazy. And he actually fills up the entire barrier they're fighting on with his wood style. That was a deep forest emergence jutsu, and sure, that's pretty powerful, but still, it's nothing compared to what Hashirama is able to do in Naruto Shippuden. Now, there's also the issue that Hashirama in Naruto Shippuden can literally resist Edo Tensei and break free whenever he wishes, so Orochimaru chooses to not even try and control him because it's just futile. So if he brought back Hashirama in part 1 at his full potential, the same thing would happen. And if Hashirama at full power gained control of his Edo Tensei body, which he would be able to, he would easily destroy the barrier that was enclosing Hiruzen and Orochimaru in the Chunin exams, and he would have destroyed Orochimaru. Sure, that barrier is pretty powerful that the Sound 4 created, but I mean, Hashirama was able to contain the Ten Tails with his heavenly gates pretty easily, actually. But obviously, Hashirama Hashirama being able to break out of Edo Tensei and being that powerful is the retcon in of itself, and we clearly see that the retcon wasn't done here. And to make things more evident, Hiruzen, when he's fighting against Tobirama and Hashirama, even says, Lord First, Lord Second, you were as strong as ever, implying that they were pretty much at the peak of their power when Orochimaru brought them back via Edo Tensei there. When in fact, Hiruzen should be like, oh man, they're actually much weaker than they used to be. I'm glad it's just like a fraction of their power, especially Hashirama, because I wouldn't have any chance. And after that, Hiruzen even managed to seal Hashirama and Tobirama into the Reaper Death Seal. The next time Hashirama appears in the story, quote unquote, he doesn't exactly appear, but the next time we see something about him is in the Valley of the End, when we see his statue and Madara's statue as well facing each other, symbolizing that they fought there. Now, this is a lore element in the Naruto series that Kishimoto planned out from very early on. Madara used the nine-tailed fox to fight against Hashirama, challenging him one last time, and their battle created the Valley of the End. He had planned for the statue's fingers to do the unison sign in the final battle between Naruto and Sasuke, because Sasuke and Naruto wouldn't have their arms from very early on as well. That was how he wanted to finish the series. So the statues were set up there from very early in the first fight in the Valley of the End. And obviously this element of Madara fighting Hashirama, creating this valley because of the destructive potential of their fights, was pretty epic. And a very cool addition to the series. It makes the past feel more legendary. And this was pretty much a clue. Okay, Hashirama was actually pretty powerful. I mean, if he was fighting against the Nine Tails and this Madara guy who seems to be powerful too, then he's strong. And we also know he won the fight. However, this wasn't yet the retcon. Because, to be fair, the fight that we eventually get to see between Madara and Hashirama in the Valley of the End is much more grandiose and powerful than what Kishimoto had intended from the beginning. There's an OVA from one of the Storm games where we see Madara versus Hashirama in the Valley of the End, and that OVA was released before they actually fought in the manga, so that was the first time we got to see that fight in any capacity, and their powers were so much less impressive. Madara was just using the Nine Tails, controlling it with Genjutsu and shooting one Bijudama at Hashirama, who was using a couple of wood-style jutsus. And yes, they create the Valley of the End, but it's not exactly like we eventually get to see in the manga, which is complete insanity, with Madara shooting a billion Bijudamas laced with Susanoo swords against a 1,000-armed Buddha statue. And we can see that this more tamed version of the Hashirama versus Madara fight was the intended version originally. Regardless, moving on to Naruto Shippuden, we start to see more relevance for Hashirama himself. First, with Yamato, a character that starts the trend of people wanting Hashirama cells to enhance their powers. Now, Yamato was an experiment done by Orochimaru. It wasn't him that got the Hashirama cells on his own volition, but it starts the trend nonetheless. Now, Yamato surely is powerful. He's like a Jonin level character, but he's not nearly Kage level, so it makes sense for a guy that got the DNA from the first Hokage to have wood style and to be pretty strong, but not anything special, except for the fact that he has a KK Genkai. But Yamato was also done to set up the fact that Hashirama was very good at suppressing the chakra of the Nine Tails, and his wood style jutsu did a lot of stuff, including that. And now we can start to connect the points. Oh, okay. Yamato is chosen to be the one to control the Nine Tails whenever he goes ballistic, using the first Hokage's necklace that Tsunade had given to Naruto. So it makes sense why Hashirama was able to tame the Nine Tails back in the day, because he has an affinity to that type of stuff. And yes, this is extremely powerful and impressive, but it's not God of Shinobi impressive, I would say. In the beginning of Naruto Shippuden, Minato was still treated very much so as the strongest ninja ever in the Leaf Village. And this trend actually continues up until the next arc, when they fight Kakuzu, and Kakuzu says to hype himself up, yeah, this headband you guys are wearing, it reminds me of the first shinobi from the Leaf Village that I've ever fought, the first Hokage, Senju Hashirama. Now, obviously, this is that type of statement that a character has to just make himself feel more impressive, so Kishimoto can amp the threat level, because he fought a legendary character and a Hokage in the past. Kakashi even says, well, if you fought Hashirama back in the day, then we're just children for you, which makes sense. Even before the retcon, Kakashi would feel that way, because Hashirama was a very respected Hokage, the guy that founded the Leaf Village, and powerful nonetheless. Now, Kakuzu's statement is extremely vague. He just says he fought against Hashirama. And you could interpret that in 1,000 different ways, and people have done that. A lot of people use that statement to justify why Kakuzu is the strongest Akatsuki member and a lot of stuff. But one thing is for certain, he didn't win the fight, regardless of how it actually was, because if he had won the fight, he would have certainly said, yeah, I beat Senju Hashirama. He wouldn't have said, I fought Senju Hashirama. That makes sense, right? It's a very fair assumption to make. So he didn't win against Hashirama, but was the fight difficult? Was the fight hard? Because technically, all those people from the 4th Battalion that were, fighting Madara, they could one day pull up to the grandchildren and say, yeah, back in the day, in the War Arc, I fought Madara Uchiha. I am amazing, am I not? And they got one shot by a single punch, but they technically fought Madara. It could very well be the same situation here for Kakuzu. He was completely annihilated by Hashirama, and yes, if you take into account retcon Hashirama, the God of Shinobi, then this is very much what would have happened to Kakuzu. And he was just saying that to really hype himself up and to frighten the Leaf Ninjas. But was this really Kishimoto's intention when he wrote the scene? Did he know Hashirama was so much more powerful than Kakuzu that this statement is a meme now? Well, no. He wanted this statement to feel credible. He wanted it to say, yeah, this guy here, he was relative to Hashirama because he fought against him. Otherwise, the character probably wouldn't bring it up if it was a completely humiliating defeat for him, which makes it a safe assumption that in that point of the story, in the Kakuzu arc, Kishimoto hadn't thought about the retcon yet. However, there was already something brewing behind the scenes. Obito slash Madara slash Toby was already doing his rounds and fooling some people, but Toby was always meant to be Obito from the beginning. Kishimoto had planned that in advance, and, well, he was always supposed to play the Madara part, meaning that Kishimoto intended to make Madara a very relevant character later in the future. Meaning that for Madara to be relevant in the future, he would have to be extremely powerful, and because he was so evenly matched with Hashirama, Hashirama would also have to be more powerful than he actually was. Because if Hashirama remained the same level as he was when he fought against Hiruzen, and Madara was around that level because they were pretty relative to each other, then Madara wouldn't exactly be a very credible threat when he eventually made his debut in the series, and also when Toby was posing as Madara, because everybody was afraid of him just because he told people that he was Madara Uchiha. That was the entire reason they went to war against him. Still, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but the idea that Hashirama and Madara would have to be more powerful was probably already being built up, especially around the Jiraiya versus Pain arc and then the Itachi versus Sasuke fight, when Madara was brought up several times and was said to be a legendary shinobi that was still alive and very much a credible threat, even though it was Toby, but for them, yeah, Madara was alive. But then we get to the Pain arc in the Leaf Invasion, and that's probably when Kishimoto decided, okay, Madara is gonna have to be more powerful than he was intended to be, meaning that Hashirama will have to be more powerful as well. Because think about this for a second. Kishimoto was building up Toby slash Madara slash Obito for a while, and he intended that to be the final boss, the antagonist of the War Arc, an arc he had been planning way before the Pain arc. The Pain was already extremely powerful and much more powerful than Hashirama back in Naruto Part 1. So, if the main antagonist of the War Arc was weaker than Pain, then things wouldn't work out very well, because the main characters will be progressing their powers, and the stakes had to be higher, especially because now they're gonna be fighting against the entire world. We then get the legend of the Sage of Six Paths in the Pain arc. Now, the legend was actually introduced during the Jiraiya versus Pain fight, but it was more cemented when he was fighting against Naruto, when he said, yes, it is said that the Sage of Six Paths was the one who created the moon all the way back, after he uses Chibaku Tensei on the Nine Tails. And then in the 5 Kage Summit arc, when Obito slash Toby slash Madara explains the heritage of the Uchiha clan to Naruto, Kakashi, and Yamato, telling them that the sage had 2 sons, and one of them originated the Uchiha clan, that's probably when he was like, okay, now that I made the Uchiha and the Senju the main clans in the verse, I'll have to make Madara and Hashirama much stronger, especially because the War Arc is coming, and I'll have to make them stronger regardless. So right around the 5 Kage Summit is where I would say that you could have gathered all the information to say, yeah, Hashirama Hashirama was actually probably the God of Shinobi now. And something else happens in the 5 Kage Summit arc. We get our second guy who heavily relies on Hashirama cells, Danzo the Base, the man who's done nothing wrong. And his example is much different from Yamato because he actually chooses to get injected with him so that he can use Izanagi and 10 Sharingan in his arm. And he really just starts the trend a lot here. After him, we find out that Obito is using Hashirama cells because he, crushed, half his body at least by that rock, and then he needed Hashirama cells to heal. We then get Madara with Hashirama cells, so you get the feeling, okay, yeah, Hashirama cells are extremely powerful, so imagine a guy that's 100% made out of Hashirama cells, aka Hashirama himself. They're almost infectious in their power, and this is very insane. And then obviously when Madara is brought back and we see the sheer power that he possesses, we are like, okay, this guy, he was fighting against Hashirama and somehow he lost. So imagine what Hashirama can do. If Madara is tossing 2 meteors down the alliance, his perfect Susanoo can slash through mountaintops without any difficulty, just with a sheer air blast of his sword being unsheathed. And Madara even says that, well, at least when Hashirama is not here and it's just me, then you'll just have to redraw the maps a bit, implying that their battles, they completely changed the landscape, which is actually pretty damn cool. And then obviously when we get the flashback between Madara and Hashirama in volume 65 of the Naruto manga, my favorite volume in the series, we experience their climactic fight in the Valley of the End that gave the valley its name, its geographic features, and also inspired their statues. And if I had one single word to define that fight, it would be legendary. The fight we got in the OVA pales in comparison to the real thing, and I think that most people didn't even imagine such an amazing display of power. It exceeded the expectations that people had for a battle of that proportion. Hashirama casually tossing Bijudama's back at Madara, then he uses the Susanoo to block it, laces the 9 tails with his Susanoo, creating the majestic attire Susanoo, and then he cuts through mountaintops casually when destroying Hashirama's wood hands. Hashirama with his 1,000-arm Buddha statue, that's one of the most epic and climactic fights in the series. Even though it's a flashback fight, it's something we're eager to see just because of how relevant that is for the entire lore of the verse. And we clearly see here that, yeah man, if Hashirama had been this powerful from the beginning of the story, then Kishimoto would have done a couple of things differently. For one, Kakuzu wouldn't be saying, yeah man, I fought against Hashirama back in the day. And also the entire Edo Tensei dynamic in the fight with Orochimaru would be different because they would have to establish Hashirama is in a very weakened state, which they most certainly did not. So it is definitely a retcon that was cemented around the Pain arc to the 5 Kage Summit arc. But was it a good idea to do that retcon? Many people will say that it wasn't a good idea because Minato now is no longer the strongest ninja in the Leaf Village and not the strongest shinobi ever, and a lot of people love Minato for some reason. And other people will say that it's not a good idea because it makes the power levels in the verse too high. However, this was a great idea. I love Madara and Hashirama being as strong as they were. Well, I've made an entire video detailing why Madara's first appearance is so great and how his immense power adds to that entrance and to the character himself, but this video is about Hashirama. Hashirama is the man who founded the Leaf Village. He is the man who founded the shinobi system as a whole, to be honest. He premiered the idea of joining clans together so that they can actually prosper a little bit and they don't have to send kids to war. Well, the shinobi system certainly failed. That was what Naruto was trying to do the entire series, to correct the shinobi system, the cycle of hatred, the deaths, the suffering, everything bad that didn't work with the shinobi system, and he eventually did so. But Hashirama did some great things as well. He made the status quo in the world as we know. He founded the Leaf Village. He was the first Hokage, and he also had the most legendary fight against Madara. I mean, the most legendary fight in universe. People always talk about that. That particular fight almost feels like legends that we would hear in real life of great warriors, godlike warriors that would clash against each other. Their battles will change the landscape, and they were extreme beings of power. Now, obviously, in real life, these stories are embellishments, but in the Naruto universe, it actually happened, and it's great to see something like that. It gives a sense of epicness to the verse, of something meaningful, that people in the past were powerful and that they are still relevant today. Their deeds will ripple through time until, well, who knows when, just like many figures you can think of in real life. And to have something like that in the Naruto universe makes it much richer. Madara taming the Nine Tails, when you hear about that, is one of the most epic things you can think of. So he was using that thing to fight against the first Hokage. Even before you watch the fight, just hearing that seems insane, unfathomable. And when you actually watch the fight, it's even more insane than when you were imagining it. I love these motifs in stories, especially fantasy stories like Naruto. And the power creep thing that people always say that is bad, well, it's not actually bad. At least for Hashirama and Madara. People say that fights just became Dragon Ball Z fights where they just blast each other without much tactics. But you definitely didn't watch the Madara versus Hashirama fight then, because that fight had a lot of strategy, even though they were using extremely powerful jutsus against each other. And I just like the concept of these two godlike ninjas from the past, which our main characters will have to catch up to. Naruto and Sasuke are very much mirrors to Hashirama and Madara. And I don't like the reincarnation thing. I think they could have just been characters that are similar to them and descendants of them. They didn't have to be reincarnation. I didn't like that after the story. It was a retcon that Kishimoto did as well, but whatever. But then resembling Hashirama and Tobirama, their relationship, their rivalry, is a very good touch in the story. Subscribe right now, seriously. It does help me, and you'll get the videos sooner if you do so. And like this video, do that one for me. It helps with the YouTube algorithm. You're gonna be fighting against it. Let's win this fight. Watch this other video right here for more Naruto content just like this one. And thank you so much for watching, guys.